2013. We had just had the Sandy Hook shooting. We had also just finished working on Natural Selection 2 for about 8 years, which was a very gun-heavy, aggressive, online shooter. And once Sandy Hook happened, I didn't really want to spend many more years making a game filled with even virtual guns. I just felt like I wanted to do something that was going to be fundamentally nonviolent and a bit more creative. And that was also the time that we were playing a lot of Minecraft. So that was a really big inspiration. Just to see a game that was so focused around building instead of whatever traditional mechanics, score, killing, frags, whatever. So all those things together kind of got me pointed in the direction of making a nonviolent exploration game. It was actually first more on the constructive and building side, but over time we oriented much more towards the discovery and exploration. It's an underwater exploration game where you crash land on an alien water world and you need to learn how to survive. And over time, you are diving deeper and deeper and finding out that there's mysteries all over the world. You explore the deep unknown and figure out a way to transform the planet and transform yourself. We used to be owned in a majority way by Perfect World, which is a Chinese game company. They always gave us independence to make our own games, but they were very, very wary of this game. They are much more kind of aligned with free-to-play games and long-term games, mobile. So this idea of making like a story-based underwater game, pay to download kind of thing, I think they told us in no uncertain terms many times not to make this game. And I don't blame them, because if you saw the early prototypes, which we might show you through this movie, you could see how ugly they are. So I can understand why they didn't like it. My role is to see potential in something before it's made. That's like my job. So I was always excited about it, but we showed it to them. They didn't like it. They still let us make it, which is wonderful. We did have to pitch them, but at the end of the day, they let us do it anyways. So they believed in us, which is incredible. I think that they knew at the end of the day that if we don't get to make the games we want, then why would they invest in us? So this is our job. We make games that we believe in. And we can make better games when we really believe in them. The prototype was the pitch. It wasn't really a pitch, because without going into too many details, like the funding, like we could spend the money mostly the way we wanted to. So it was more of like a formality that we had to get their approval. They always told us they want us to make games that we want, but we still had to run it by them. So I guess they could have stopped it if they wanted to, but they were nice and they let us make it. They just made sure to tell us, please don't make this. You're going to go out of business. Please, please, please. They saw the early prototype. They said, we think this is a mistake. We don't like this game. Underwater games don't sell, but we trust you. Do what you may. So, it was amazing that they let us do it. So, I'm really happy about that. So early 2013, just coming off the tail of finishing Natural Selection 2. That was a really tough game to make. We had started the studio. We had worked with investors to try to raise money. We wrote our own engine. We hired a team. We were always on the brink of going out of business. So it was a really difficult game. And we finally had released NS2. It had done reasonably well enough for us to think about making a new game. That was the time where I was playing a lot of Minecraft and really enjoying that and just loving the idea of a much more construction-focused game. And so I remember sitting in my garden here in San Francisco, back when I had a little garden, dreaming of actually space stations and players playing co-op and building a space station together. I actually made a very small prototype for that, and we ditched it pretty much immediately. Both the space station theme, because we had seen all these other space games that were brewing. We just kind of arbitrarily decided to make an underwater game. And because co-op is much harder technically to make a prototype with, we just said, okay, let's just start with the single player component. We went from co-op space building game to single player underwater discovery game, all before the first real prototype. The first proper, really playable prototype was underwater. All in Unity, about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to make that first prototype. All cubes and spheres and flat shaded, crappy artwork from the internet. We had seen Notch had announced his space game, the speed of light. I don't know how you say it, 10 to the C or whatever that was. Whenever you start working on a new game idea, you immediately start noticing all the other people that are working on games in that same genre. And so, I don't know, I guess we got scared off of space like pretty much instantly. Our company is named Unknown Worlds. Like I always was dreaming of discovering, underwater or outer space. That was always in the background. So space was, seemed like it was off limits. So we just made a quick decision to try something underwater. And at that stage, you're just prototyping. You haven't made a decision for your company, right? You haven't decided like how much money you're going to spend. You haven't made any decisions. You're just a couple people deciding to make a prototype. So it's an easy decision to make. And, we never went back. Probably the biggest way, our experience with Natural Selection 2 affected Subnautica was we had previously been focused on a lot of mod support. So, NS2 was built on modding, and we actually built the core gameplay with the same tools that we wanted our community to use. And it actually didn't work out that well. So I think probably the biggest thing was we just decided not to include our community in core development. And we just wanted to kind of make something all our own and just, roll it all ourselves and not worry about other people helping in that sense. We could talk all day about like how to build prototypes and how to like listen for those secret signals of where you think the game is leading you and where you think the game wants to be. I mean, generally speaking, that first prototype was just about discovery. It was about being underwater. You were on a sub and you could build new pieces onto your sub, and that would affect how the sub would pilot. And then you would go out, swim into your really terrible looking underwater world that was just like a height map and like, really, there's like no fish, there's no lighting. You'd swim out, you grab a couple pieces of loot, you bring it back to your sub, and I think you could like craft like a knife or something really simple. There certainly was no story. There was no creatures. There was there was ambience. So you did have that feeling of, I wouldn't say terror, but it was definitely like an evocative, scary feeling. We played that, we put it in front of people on the team. They gave us feedback, told us what they liked and they didn't like. And then we used that to kind of direct the next prototype. And our method for that, which we've only done this on this one project, but I hope we continue to do, is we would actually look at the number of minutes of fun. We would target a number of minutes of fun. So that first prototype was like 5 minutes of fun. Like we want people to be able to have fun for that amount of time. And then the next prototype, we're like, okay, how can we make 20 minutes? How can we get 20 minutes out of this? Okay, well, we could add a couple loot types. We can allow you to craft this one new thing. Maybe you can pilot the sub. There's like a new upgrade thing you can stick on there. I think that'll occupy people for about 20 minutes. Then get the feedback, get it back, sift through it. Okay, how can we get 40 minutes out of this? And we just kept on doing that. And each prototype would take between 2 and 4 weeks, probably 2 or 3 weeks. Over time, those minutes of fun starts getting exponential. You're not making 5 or 10 or 20 minutes each time. You're getting like an hour of new fun. Or sometimes near the end of that, we'd get like 2 new hours. So because you start to weave the systems together and start leveraging what you've already built. That was a really organic kind of bottom-up way that we directed the prototype. The biggest thing I'm concerned with is the emotions. So you have to make sure you know what your emotions are that you're going for. And in fact, I've talked at length about this now, but instead of just having design pillars, like many games, like Blizzard games and that era of games, people have like small paragraphs describing like the game features, high level, that they want to include in their game. And so we did that, but we also had the emotions associated with those pillars. So for us, the main one was the thrill of the unknown. That's an emotional pillar. No matter what we do, I don't care what the game's going to be about, like regardless of whether it's an RPG or a shooter, we need to be focused on getting the thrill of the unknown. So we use that really as a guidepost, as a way of finding our way towards what the game was going to be. Because at that moment, you have no idea what you're building. You can have all the preconceptions you want, but you basically have no idea what's going to work and what's not. But if you can stay focused on that emotion, then you can that will allow you to kind of know that you're going in the right direction. It's a long process, and that first prototype was a main menu with a song behind it. The music behind it, to me, created those emotions. So it started there, and then built up. until the point where, I don't know, maybe the 8th or 9th main prototype, we now had the core of a game that was functional and it looked terrible with no art at all, but it was still creating some of those feelings. So we knew we were kind of on the right track. I guess that's where, if it was a film, that would be where you're done with pre-production. I don't think we ever had like a formal exit of pre-production. I mean, if we had lots of money, we would have just stopped. We would have thrown out the prototype, decided, okay, what engine are we going to use? How big is this world going to be? How is the streaming going to work? All that stuff. You evaluate your technology. This, again, is like highly theoretical. I don't know anyone that works like this. But we would then take that moment and start building the artwork for real, doing concepts and all that stuff and fleshing it out. And at some point for us, after a year and a half of that production, we felt like we had enough that we could release publicly that would just be like basically a minimum viable product. You know, it's just enough of a game. It's like 3 to 5 hours worth. The artwork is representative of the final quality. The game runs just barely well enough. You know, you need to be embarrassed with your first prototype or your first release, public release. If you're not embarrassed by it, you're probably waiting too long. That's our view. So we were embarrassed by it, and our players were like semi-happy with it. They could see that it had some promise, but you know, there wasn't much there. But crucially, they could show us what they were responding to just by what they were talking about and, you know, YouTube videos. We needed that feedback then. We couldn't, if we had waited another year, we would have been building all the wrong stuff. So we needed to be embarrassed. We needed to get it out there early, you know, take our hits here and there on reviews. You know, you get whatever 20, 30,000 people playing your game. You can tell very quickly if you're on the right track or not, what they're responding to. A lot of Silicon Valley likes to talk about minimum viable products, which is basically the smallest possible version of your offering that might fit your need, like the why of what you're building. And I mean, the form of it might be quite different than what you finally end up with. Like there is a finally, there is no finally, but you know, your dream product might be quite different than your minimum viable. But if you can get something out there in front of people, then of course they can start giving you feedback to tell you whether it's working for them. So for us, the minimum viable would be the first version of early access. So something that you're selling, it's publicly available. For us, we couldn't ever get to a minimum viable without doing something much smaller first. So internally, I like to call that the minimum crappy playable, the MCP instead of the MVP. You have so much pressure on yourself to make something great, you know, especially you take a lot of pride, you know, game developers take a lot of pride in what they're making. If you are always holding yourself to this high standard, you basically never make anything. So if you just tell yourself this is going to be crappy, but I'm going to make something, and I'm going to put it in front of someone, you give yourself permission, and in fact, you are labeling it crappy right away. You have no hope of it being any good. Suddenly, you're free to just release something and put it out in front of someone. I mean, you're on fire. You can make something instantly if you have permission to do that. You know, it takes a week. Make something crappy. Somehow, there's a miracle happens. You make something crappy. It helps you make something good, you know, much more quickly. I don't know how. It's just a magic process. I can't explain it. So that's been our approach. And all the crappy stuff was all internal. So the team would look at it. We definitely brought in friends, and we definitely brought it to people off the team, but it's maybe 50 people total. You're still comfortable showing it to people, and you can just tell them this is crappy, and it's obviously crappy when they see it, but you don't care because you're learning. Not making a financially viable product at that point. You're really just learning what you're going to make. So the thrill of the unknown, which is the emotional, I call it like an emotion pillar. It's really, for me, it's the why of the game. You can just make games to make money. You can make games to make a living. You can make games for fame if you're lucky. But at the end of the day, if none of those things happen, there has to be a reason, at least for me, there has to be a reason to make a game. It's the aspect of it that gets you excited. And for me, we're called unknown worlds. Like, there's something about the unknown that gets me really excited. In retrospect, it was just a decision to choose that one pillar. Like, even in the early prototypes, we found ways, like little moments that felt like, okay, this thing is generating a little bit of the unknown. Like, we'd have like a tooltip when you find a piece of loot and the tooltip says something like, it's like a mysterious horn. Like it doesn't tell you what it is exactly. You're like, what am I supposed to do with this horn? But like in my mind, that little ... at the end, like suddenly I start to think, oh, what else is in this game? It's just a tooltip in text. But it wasn't like the art was pretty or anything. It was a suggestion that there's more here than meets the eye. Not having boundaries around the world. You're looking down at the terrain, even when it's really ugly, and you just see this hole that just opens up below you into blackness. You get like a little shiver, like, oh, wow. And so we were just noticing the little things that would tend to generate these tiny little emotional spikes. You just kind of lean into those things, and we just kept doing that. Basically, it constrains your development in a way that's important, and then everything else can change. As long as you're going towards that thrill of the unknown, then you're on the right path. Or, maybe you're not on an optimal path, but you're on a good path. I think the only person really talking about emotional design in video games is Genova Chen. So he's the founder of that game company who did Flow, Flower, Journey, and now Sky. And he talks really eloquently about this. It really focuses you on just like the whole reason that we're here. And I think, filmmakers are really tuned into this, script writers. But, historically, video game developers are so focused on programming, technology, like we were talking about before, assembly language. There's so many technical barriers to creating a game. It's a miracle to just make something, but at least in the past, there have been all these obstacles. Now we can make anything we want. So now the question is, what do you want to make and why? And let's try to make games that are not about mechanics, even though mechanics are a great way to look at games. We can do a lot more than that. If we want to affect people, we want to be a more culturally significant medium. We want to affect people like sadness, melancholy, connection. There's so many more subtle emotions that we can get from our players. At the end of the day, that's why people play games, right? Is to get positive emotions, or sometimes negative emotions. Maybe thrills and scares and stuff could be classified as negative, but people want to experience those emotions. Like they want to go on a roller coaster or go in a haunted house. Okay, we can do those. But a lot of the more subtle emotions we're just now starting to think about. I think it's really important that as game developers, we're thinking about emotions now as we kind of grow to the next level, bring games to the next level of significance. Yeah, PAX East, I guess that was probably 2014, PAX East, I think, was the first time we released anything publicly that resembled kind of what you would call Subnautica today. That was like a 5 or 10 minute demo, and it was very quest oriented. It was like, go, craft a sea glide, go investigate, this, Cyclops. It was like there were goals on the screen that got checked off when you did them. So the parts of that worked were the visuals were finally working, and a lot of the feelings were good, but the high level progression of the game was completely like placeholder and terrible. But it was enough to get people excited enough for a 5 or 10 minute booth experience. About 6 months or 12 months after that, that's when we were out of money, and so we knew we had to release in early access, and that was December 2014. And we released that on early access. Again, handcrafted world, stripped down, probably 4 or 5 hours worth of gameplay. Yeah, we wouldn't have released then if we didn't have to, but in retrospect, I'm really glad that we had to, because that, again, got to be embarrassed by your first release, which we were, and then the ball started rolling from there. And then we released the first version into early access. And I would say that we had some of the unknown in there, but we didn't have any of the thrill. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, we'll have a game, we have this nonviolent game, there'll be all this science you can do, maybe you can terraform, maybe you're gonna trying to get this planet ready for the rest of your people to arrive, so you're farming and studying creatures. And to me, that all sounded pretty interesting, but there was no thrill there. So, and I think our players really noticed that. I mean, they didn't know about our goals for creating the thrill of the unknown. That was nothing that we ever told them. But it was pretty clear that, I wouldn't say they were bored, but they could see that there was something good here, but they weren't really captured, it didn't really grab them. They found some of the unknown that was alluring to them, but there weren't any thrills. Accidentally, at one point, we could see people, when we saw our first big creature in the game, we saw how players reacted to it. The reefback, it's just this big like turtle creature, and it has no relevance to the game. There's no loot involved. It can't attack you, but it is a giant creature that we saw people respond to in a visceral way. And I wouldn't say that one was as much of a thrill, but it was, we could just see this like, expression of awe on people's faces when they saw this giant creature floating above them and like moaning into the depths. It really made us pay attention. And our art director, Corey Strader, he's like, when he saw that, he's like, we need some other big creatures. We need some scary stuff. And he immediately started working on the Reaper Leviathan, which became probably the scariest thing in the game, and quite possibly responsible for, 100 million YouTube views alone through reaction videos and, jump scare type videos. And I was always against all that stuff because I didn't want it to be like horror based or, really conventional in any way. But seeing players' reactions to it, like, we had to try it. It looked like it was going to be fertile ground. Then we released the Reaper Leviathan. People went completely bonkers. And it's like, then we just lined up all these other big creatures, not all scary, but, really big creatures that had many different roles. That fundamentally changed our development by watching players and seeing what they actually responded to. And similarly, actually, is spectacle. We saw the spectacle, and people, they saw this like crash ship on the horizon, which in the beginning was, the very first version was just a billboard. It's like a flat texture. We're like, okay, well, you crash land on the planet, and so we need to have your ship somewhere to kind of put you in the situation. Okay, let's make something quick. We ripped it out of the concept art, stuck the billboard, and just like literally clipped it out of the concept art, stuck it on the horizon, and players would immediately swim towards it. They would land in their escape pod. They would just look at the horizon. There's one thing they can see. They just immediately jump out and they swim towards it, which is the most boring thing in the world. It takes like 15 minutes to get there. Then they would get there and they would realize that it's just a big flat texture. It looked horrible. So we knew that we had to, react and do something with it. So first we made a 3D model. Now it looked cooler when you got close to it, but now they wanted to get inside. Okay, well, again, Corey was like, let's let players go inside. Let's have almost like a first-person shooter level inside the Aurora. Okay, now we have to make it blow up, so then there's holes inside, and it ended up being a huge amount of work. But this was the whole reactive approach that we took, because we saw what players wanted, we saw what they expected, we saw what they really wanted, and it fit. I mean, I wouldn't say it was part of anything original that we thought about, but we weren't just pandering. It wasn't just like, do the things that people want the most, regardless of what it is. We thought, hey, that would be cool. That does fit with this game. So then we start working on it. Then we put that in, and then again, it's all this constant back and forth between putting stuff in, seeing how players react to it, taking that feedback, thinking about what it means, and then choosing the next set of features to include. I'm trying to remember the exact stage of events on the Aurora and the radiation. There's a random time that elapses before it blows up. So for some people, when they're swimming towards it, all of a sudden they hear it ticking down and it blows up. Other people, they're off, they're deep down and they hear the countdown, and then they see the shock wave under the water. They didn't actually see it with their own eyes, but they understood. We kind of telegraphed the events beforehand. Either way, you hear the radiation sounds. You hear the Geiger counter clicking. So it's kind of a cue that, okay, there's something to do with radiation and the Aurora, which later becomes like kind of a mini goal to build a radiation suit. And then guess what? There's only one irradiated place in the world. So you use your dive suit to go check out the Aurora. I'm trying to remember exactly the events, but we knew that players wanted a spectacle because they saw that thing on the horizon and they just were kind of like almost asking for something to happen there. So we spent way too much time to figure out a way to have it blow up. And this was all about reinforcing the whole idea that you crash in the first place, it's on fire. Then once it blows up, which is like, again, something that people got really excited about on YouTube. We saw so many people like, here it comes, 10, 9, 8, they're counting down, they blow it up. They like reset the world, they blow it up again. Like, I don't know why they loved it so much, but they loved it. And then it's this whole journey to the Aurora to get on there. I would say that was something where the community taught us what the game wanted to be. And the game taught us that too. It's not about doing everything that people tell you, because then you're ending up with a kitchen sink game, which we have a little bit of, I have to admit, but it's about, you have to apply your judgment. We did have a lot of people who on the team who did want more combat, even after I declared at the beginning, like, we shall make a game without guns because of Sandy Hook. I mean, it's a judgment call, I guess, and the team has a lot to say about this stuff. A lot of it was, I would say, discussed, which means like a lot of arguing. I mean, not everyone was fully on board with that. So, in the beginning, that's what it was, and over time, I think people came to appreciate that more. But we did have influences. We have some pseudo weapons in the game that snuck in, because we were always trying to figure out a way for players to be able to deal with these big creatures. You can't just like have these giant creatures that attack you and you can do nothing against them. I mean, it feels like fundamentally like non-interactive. So we were always trying to figure out, well, maybe you can use these torpedoes, but they don't hurt the creatures. They just displace them. They have like tornadoes that whirlpools, so they send them flying. Ultimately, those experiments, I would say, were unsuccessful, even though they're in the game. I would prefer that they weren't in the game, but it's not my game, it's the team's game. So I just kind of provide the initial kind of direction, and a lot of direction during the game as well. It's a process of constant judgment and discussion and evolution. A lot of that we ended up by having to reframe how we thought about the game. Instead of thinking about ways to interact with the creatures, it was more about, how can we experience the majesty of the creatures? It's less about a game system and more about an aesthetic experience. We had some difficulty with the Cyclops, when you see these giant, underwater, essentially sea dragons, and they're attacking your sub because you're getting close to a place that they're guarding. In the beginning we were we have these creatures that are attacking. It seems so dramatic. People responded to it, but what can you do in response? Is it just random? Do you always have to run away? That didn't feel that great. And then the torpedo thing, I was really unhappy about just any kind of weapons. And then we had this moment where we realized that instead of thinking about gameplay, instead of a way that you can think about interacting or dissuading this creature from attacking you, why don't we just make the experience of them attacking you so awesome that it's like a plus, not a minus? Even though they're hindering you, it's such a cool experience that you don't mind. So that's where we had this idea about doing this Das Boot or Hunt for Red October feel, where you're in your sub, you can see this giant creature on the sonar, this little blip coming towards you. Maybe they've even attacked you in the past, so you know how horrible they are. And so you could, they're attracted by light now, they're attracted by sound. So we added all these control panels to turn off the lights, turn off the sound, turn off the engines, and sit there in the darkness and just basically hold your breath and hope that they don't find you. So it was all about creating the tension and creating that experience of hiding, make that cat and mouse game, and make the player love being hunted instead of fighting a creature or avoiding a creature. So we had to just change our mindset completely. In a normal kind of survival or kind of crafting type game, they have combat. So something like Minecraft or Terraria or Don't Starve, you would, explore the world, you find loot, pick up the loot if it's freely available, you kill monsters. The monsters drop pieces hide or bones or whatever. You use that loot, you bring it back to your crafting station. You use that to build new weapons and traversal, ways to traverse or survive. So kind of at the core, it's explore, fight, craft, and the crafting helps you kill, basically. Either kill or explore. By removing combat, we removed 1/3 of that loop. So it's 3 points on the loop. So now we just have explore and find stuff, and then use finding that stuff to craft. And now the key is we had to make sure that all the stuff that you crafted would help you traverse and find stuff. So we had things like the flashlight, which allows you to navigate when it's dark, which is 1/3 of the time when it's night. We allow you to build submarines, which let you go deeper and let you go farther. Air tanks, scuba stuff, so you can stay underwater longer, which means you can kind of go deeper, which gives you access to more loot. In the beginning, that wasn't enough. I think we noticed that it was missing the combat. But I think what we realized over time was it wasn't missing combat, it was missing excitement. So when we realized that the combat could be replaced with excitement, that's where the big creatures filled the gap. That's where even like the Aurora exploding filled the gap. We added story elements, so that helped. But we really just needed danger and excitement and the thrills. And once we put those in, I don't think anyone complained or noticed that it was missing, but it just took time to flesh that out. And then the loop is actually pretty much the same. It's just you're much more focused on oxygen and depth and to an extent protection, so you can kind of ward off creatures in the more dangerous areas. So we have a scanner tool. The scanner could be used to scan any plant, any loot item, and creatures. You know, you hold it in your hands and you have to swim over to a creature and aim it at them and hold it down. You have to 2 to 3 seconds in total with them in your crosshairs. And once you do that, you get a journal entry telling you something about the creature. Even though it wasn't combat, it actually had you chasing down creatures and kind of keeping them in your sights and kind of avoiding them, making sure they don't hurt you. So you kind of have to know how they swim. And it kind of got you up close with the creatures in a way that kind of felt like a slightly challenging combat replacement. And I think that also kind of filled in the gaps for people. I mean, it's a pretty minor aspect. You only do it once per creature, but I felt like it did really help, with making creatures relevant. And that's something we actually struggled with for most of the game's development, spending years trying to make creatures an integral aspect of the loop and the experience. And we realized later that they're just not. They're an aesthetic experience. They don't have to be gameplay focused. There was enough gameplay all throughout the rest of the mechanics. We never really figured out a way to make the creatures super relevant, but we did make them exciting and beautiful and cute and funny and scary. We kind of just covered them emotionally instead of game systems wise. I mean, with the nonviolence in the team, I think everyone on the team was initially receptive to that idea, and they were generally excited about that. But of course, when the road gets rocky and the ships get rough and players are asking for, please just give me one harpoon. Like, why does this game not have a harpoon? Why do you have big creatures attacking me and I can't do anything back? That's where their resolve gets tested, all of our resolves. Development got hard. And that's when people are like, well, maybe we should start blurring the line here and we should start putting in some non-violent weapons that can move creatures around or can divert them. We have decoys. Decoys work relatively well. We launched, and into early access, we had not that many people playing, not that many people were buying, and less people were buying than mouths to be fed. So we now have a shelf life. We have 2 months, 3 months where we have to get our act together. We have to sell better, or we're done. And it's not just this game. It's basically the last game, which built into this game because we spent all the profits from the last game to get to this point. So there's a lot on the line, and there's a lot of people who are on the team who are very passionate about it and they want to fix it. And so they're kind of wondering, well, this crazy idea Charlie had, is it really a good one? Maybe we should start exploring. They want to fix it maybe even more than I do. I mean, to me, that felt like we were pandering. That's what it felt like to me. It's every time you put in a lame weapon that kind of moved a creature or stunned them, froze them in time. To me, that's not playing to our strengths. We're doing something because they say they want it, but it's a half solution. It's not where the game excels. I've never heard people say, oh, I love the stasis rifle in Subnautica. It's just so fun and interesting and cool. It freezes creatures. I mean, it works, but that's not what the game's about. It's not about freezing creatures. It's about exploration. It's about discovery, building, and the thrill of the unknown. So every time we spent, effort making a lame-o weapon, we could have been working on a new story arc or a new biome. I mean, you can't just say that programming resources are the same as level design resources, but that it all takes focus and it all takes attention. We could have done that better. We could have, I don't know how, but I mean, now financially we're more comfortable, so we're not going to have to make those trade-offs. It won't be so urgent. Oh guys, if we're not profitable this month, we're screwed. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Now we can just make games the way we want to. Long term, we have to make sure our projects are successful, but it's not the actual building of the game isn't on that knife's edge anymore. So we don't have to worry about that. I mean, we also had to think about just how we thought about our creatures or monsters. I mean, in most games, they'd be monsters. For us, it was really important that we thought of them as creatures. You know, nature is not evil. Nature can be terrifying, and you know, a great white shark or a lion can be totally terrifying and scary and dangerous, but they are clearly not evil. They have no malice in them. You know, they're looking for food like any other creature. But to us, it was really important to maintain this idea of representing nature properly and man's place in nature. I thought it was really fun to think about humanity not being at the top of the food chain. It's nice to kind of put us back in our place. When you don't have all your cool toys, like, yeah, you're kind of in the middle. You're definitely not at the top anymore, which is a fun thing to play with. Also, by thinking of them as creatures, we know that they have their own lives and their own motives and they basically don't care about you. This entire world of the game does not care about the player. I mean, it actually does a little bit, but for the most part, we want to make sure it feels like the world doesn't care about you. You know, stuff is happening on its own. Radio signals are coming in, you know, the radio messages, the aurora is blowing up. Like, stuff is happening whether you want it to or not. It isn't all oriented magically around the player. And for us, I think that was important because we wanted to create an experience that felt real, but also just one that it's not artificially designed. It's not this like amusement park where everything is like designed for the player. Like, and over here, if you go down this path, everything, like all the animatronic creatures look at you at the right time. They all, you know, make their little sounds and stuff. And it's like, to me, that feels really cheesy. And so, I mean, even though we actually do that a little bit, we have to make sure that it never feels that way. And it's an illusion to make sure that it never feels like that. We didn't want players killing the creatures because that's just off theme. You know, we don't make a non-violent game where all of a sudden the game is motivating you to kill creatures. So obviously they could give you no loot. We also, I think we intuitively realized, now I understand why it works, but if you want players not to do something, you can't just, like, if you penalize them, that's not enough to get them not to do it. If you don't give them a reward, that's not enough to get them not to do it. You have to make sure they don't get feedback. So when you kill a creature, it just like lamely does nothing. Like, it pretty much, if you sit there and you craft a knife and you knife a Reaper Leviathan somehow 1,000 times and you finally manage to kill it, it doesn't play a sound. I mean, there might be a little bit of like tiny like blood particle system, but it just kind of falls limp and it just kind of drifts down to the bottom of the ocean. It's really unrewarding. And I think that's actually the reason why people don't kill a lot of creatures. They might make videos where they just want to be subversive and they do it, but as a general rule, people are not focused on that. To me, it's interesting to have a world where humanity is hunted, and you know, we live in a world that's very man-made, and we've changed Earth to really fit our image. You know, it's not very scary and not very primal. So I think that by making a world that doesn't care about you, where you don't have much power and you are a speck compared to these giant creatures that have been, you know, living in this world for a long time without you, kind of gets your adrenaline pumping, and it kind of puts humanity back in their place. It definitely humbles you, and you know, kind of you start to appreciate the animal kingdom, even the fake animal kingdom. I think players responded to that. I think it was also inspiring for us to kind of have awe with the natural world, even if it's a completely artificial one. When we started the game, we thought that we were going to make it would all be procedurally generated. You know, again, thrill of the unknown. Like, it's got to be unknown. Like, it obviously should be randomly generated. And we spent many months trying to make that work. And maybe in the future, like if we did a sequel or something, we might be able to figure out a way to make it work. It sounds fruitful. But, you know, we were gearing up for PAX. So the first time we were going to show this game in any kind of public way. And we were not able to get procedural generation working well enough, even for a tiny demo, for like a 5 or 10 minute demo. We just couldn't do it. So we thought, okay, just for PAX, we'll handcraft the world, this little crappy map. And the results that we got were so good. They were visually so much better than anything that we had generated that it kind of led us to believe that we just needed to handcraft the whole world. The handcrafted versus procedural was a big debate on our team. I think most people on the team wanted handcrafted and I wanted procedural. So it just became impossible to defend at some point because we saw how well it was working, and we saw that we still had nothing procedurally. There was nothing that we had never gotten it working well enough to compare. I remember very clearly everyone just like walking over to my desk and being like, "We got to talk. We're not doing this." And I knew that they were right, but it was a huge fork in the road for the game. We kind of did some sleight of hand to make it feel like it was procedurally generated. I think a lot of people, probably many of our players, think it is, or they're not sure, mostly through a random starting spot. So we have basically an infinite number of starting locations. If you play the game more than once, or you see someone play it on YouTube and then you play it, you're going to have a different experience. Not like fundamentally different, but different enough that it feels like you're not going to recognize the world. Maybe after 20, 30 hours, you're going to start to know your way around the world, but it's big enough that I don't think most players ever notice. I personally spent probably 2 years working on like an ecosystem of some kind, where creatures, had their own goals and they had their own food sources, and creatures were populated, depending on, the interactions of the player and, plants. It was a huge technical challenge, and it always seemed like it would be a great idea, but it was never really got it working well enough that we could actually ship it. And a lot of that code is actually still in the game. So it's one of the reasons that streaming is like, we have like a lot of pop-in, because we're loading so much data from every creature. Every creature saves all their state, and I think we still have a lot of that baggage in there. The lesson from the ecosystems was really, the focus of the game was not the creatures. If we thought of it as like the typical loop, then we knew that the creatures, would have to be a big part of that, but we realized later that they're just a surface level. So it doesn't matter how much work we spent on the ecosystem, it would never be a big part of the game. The other lesson I learned there was that in order for an ecosystem to work, or for those kind of like low-level interactions to like thief level or spelunky level interactions, for those to work, you need a density of creatures and a tightness of your level design. It all needs to be dense enough that when one thing happens, it will trigger and chain react to other creatures. And so, for example, like I really wanted you to turn on your flashlight and have creatures be attracted to the light. And then when they're attracted to the light, you see other plants that they swim near, they go back into the ground. They're hiding. And then maybe there's another creature that was about to eat that plant, and then the plant goes in the ground, so they turn away and they go somewhere else. Like, for that to all happen, you need a density of creatures, plants, and just the levels all have to be tight enough that those reactions continue. So, but instead what would happen is, because we have a giant underwater world and it's unbounded vertically, and you're flying, you're essentially flying. You're swimming, but you think of it as flying because you can go up and down as much as you want. What would happen for us is you shine your flashlight, maybe some creatures come over, but they're not close enough to any plant to make them retreat, and then the interaction stops. So that was like years of work. That was like any kind of chain reaction would stop immediately every time, and there was nothing we could ever do about it. I wanted a game that was replayable. I love Spelunky. Spelunky is probably my favorite game of all time. So I guess I just wanted more Spelunky type interactions in the world. And I think when you play an underwater game, or a game that takes place in a natural environment, you kind of expect there to be an ecosystem and creatures and food chains and all that stuff. It's just a natural fit. And a lot of players would ask us about that. So I think it kind of fit the theme, and there are mechanics that I just love. So that was the goal. I can't say it actually fit with the thrill of the unknown, so maybe that would be another like red flag. Probably should have just stopped it right there, because it's not part of the thrill of the unknown. But we have other features in the game that aren't about the unknown. So, maybe that's not enough. Maybe I'm just being hard on myself. Yeah, one big feature that we left that we are still excited about, and we might sneak into below zero, is the transfuser. So again, this is the idea when you remove creatures from that combat loop, you still want creatures to be relevant. And that's why we had the scanner. That worked really well. But the scanner you just use once. Once you scan a creature, you unlock the journal entry, and that's it. So we thought, how could we include creatures like with a dexterity kind of component and be able to and need to get close to them many times? I think the answer that we had years ago was a transfuser, like a DNA sandbox, where you have a special tool. You go up to a creature, you extract a piece of DNA, takes some time, you got to keep them in your crosshairs again. You pull out the DNA, that gives you a craftable ingredient. You didn't have to kill the creature, but you do get some loot out of the creature. You bring it back to your station, you use a centrifuge to make a potion, essentially a potion. I mean, it's really like a serum. And then you use that serum to inject it in yourself, and now you get some property from the creature. Maybe you get their thick armor, or you get their water breathing, or you get maybe your skin starts glowing, like because that creature glows, or you can actually inject that serum in a creature, and now that creature gets properties that came from another creature. To us, I mean, that sounded really cool. We never really got it working very well. Again, probably because I think if we think about it more in an aesthetic view, it makes more sense. Like if you just think how cool would it be to glow, that's awesome. But if it's, how cool would it be to move faster so now I can dodge the creature so I can get into the cave so I can get the loot, that's much more like puzzly and requires a much tighter design than we have. So I think, again, this is where we always come back. We have to reframe thinking about gameplay into thinking about an aesthetic experience. So maybe the transfuser could work as a pure aesthetic tool, and people would just enjoy like swelling up or sinking or all these wild effects. But we're still working on it, so we'll see. The roguelike aspects were there from the beginning, and they never worked. I mean, just fighting it the whole time. I mean, procedural generation, the random starting point, that did work. I did prototype once random attributes for creatures, so the creatures weren't the same every time. Even creature names or creature variants, so like one peeper might be like a different size, like we have creatures of different sizes, and then they have different DNA, so like maybe they have, I'm trying to remember what special attributes we tried, but like a legendary or like a rare version of a fish. But we never could really figure out what attributes they would have that would actually make players care. Again, if it tied into combat, that would be a lot simpler. For us, it just wasn't the heart of the game. The roguelike stuff never really resonated because, you care, I guess players cared too much about the world, and the story aspect was a natural fit. And once you do that, you don't want to play it again. Or maybe you want to play it again, but it's not a roguelike. It's not where you die and just immediately start over and play that again. It just never fit. It's kind of a square peg, round hole kind of thing. You can get a lot of gameplay with like a relatively small amount of effort with a roguelike. I mean, of course, roguelikes have their own challenges that are, maybe harder to balance, harder to get the visuals where you want them, but certainly there's a promise of tons of gameplay and replayability for less work. Ultimately, the most powerful tool for us was reframing. It's this idea of like reframing combat. Like why is combat there in the first place? Why do we have violence in the game? A lot of that is due to feedback. Can we add feedback to something else? When you're, like I was saying before, when you're at the bottom of the ocean, you got creatures attacking you. If we reframe it from challenge to experience, that moves mountains instantly, because now we no longer think about, pigeonholing crappy combat or, crappy interaction into a game that doesn't warrant it. Instead, we now focus on the experience of being the mouse while the cat is chasing you. That's when the real progress is made, is when we change our thoughts around something. We reframe the idea. And we didn't think about, hey guys, we just need to deploy the reframe tool. I mean, now I can start to think about it that way. We're feeling stuck. Okay, why are we stuck? Okay, can we reframe this? Now I'm going to do that a lot faster. But instead, we would put in some bad weapons or put in some bad tools or kind of make the creatures telegraph their moves more. Or we tried lots of different fixes, and none of them were really working that well. And then, of course, I think Scott, one of our game programmers, he's the one, I think, that reframed it as, this like Das Boot experience. And as soon as he said it, I knew, or maybe I said it and he knew, I can't remember, but it was so clear that's the way we should go. And it's like a transformative moment. There's a scene in Das Boot where the whole crew are sitting there at like a really deep depth, and their ship is creaking, and you're wondering if the pressure is going to give out or not. Are they going to live? And it's all about the tension. I mean, it's isolation, but there's many people down there, but they're cut off from from their families and everyone else. And it's just, it's a 10-minute scene of excruciating tension. And there's stuff happening off screen that you can't see. And it's all just like your mind like going crazy. So I guess that would be the inspiration for that, tension at the bottom of the ocean kind of feel. Hunt for October, it's similar though. I mean, that was more about reading the dial, reading all the gauges and stuff to see where the torpedo was coming, how they're going to dodge it. Again, they can't see it. Your mind goes crazy with the possibilities. I mean, they do show it a little bit to the viewer, but not to the people on the sub. But that one is really about, reading the dials and hearing the alarms go off and the emergency klaxons. So we channeled that a lot. We put in a ton of that stuff. And because we didn't put in the fighting, we could just take all that effort, don't put in the weapons, don't put in the creature death and all that stuff. We then put it on like all those little HUD elements and the ambience. The computer talking to you and your Cyclops catching fire and all that stuff, and you having to put it out. I'm like the world's biggest James Cameron fan, as any of my friends can attest to, and I often live my life as asking the question, what would James Cameron do? Yeah, Natural Selection was pretty much channeling aliens. I watched that movie probably hundreds of times, and every time I needed energy, I would just turn on a random scene in Aliens and implement a welder or some kind of alien movement trait or something. Subnautica, I mean, I wouldn't say it was directly from Abyss. I would say probably Avatar and Abyss were both equal influences. And of course, it's not just my influences on the game. There's many other artistic and other influences. We actually implemented some of the creaking and the structural elements of like when they were building the stations that they were building down, they were falling apart and stuff, and people, like when Ed Harris like falls down into the abyss and he's running out of oxygen. Some of those themes I think made their way into the game. At one point we were thinking the game would be much more Abyss style, where you're building down and it's all about pressure and keeping your structures like working. We do have some of that still in there where, if you build a base that's too big or too deep without reinforcing it, it will break and water comes in. So that's a really cool moment for us, but it's not really the core of the game. It's just something that kind of fits in there. Beautiful, glowing alien creatures and, the tension of underwater. A lot of that came from the Abyss. As well as like actually in Below Zero, we have like flowers that react to you and glow and stuff, which are very Avatar-y. So yeah, looking back, I would say reframing as a general like mindset or a tool that was the secret. I will be doing that a lot more and more intentionally, and using that word as a touchstone now on the team. Hey guys, maybe we should reframe this. Why are we stuck? Can we think about this in a new way that would make things a lot easier? Adding kind of lame weapons, I would say it's a surface level fix. I don't think it really made anyone happy. I mean, they did work. I mean, I have never tried playing the game without them. It would be a fun experiment to try removing those tools and just playing the game and see how it changed. Maybe it's probably about the same game because people use those things so rarely. Of all the streams I've watched, I mean, probably hundreds of hours of people playing. The amount of times I see people using a stasis rifle or the torpedoes is like less than 0.5% of their gameplay time. I mean, probably well less than that. So yeah, I think we just answered that question. They should have been removed. That's not going to help anyone. So it certainly is not where the game shines. In the beginning, this whole idea of hand-holding or helping the player figure out what to do, I think we had many people on the team who wanted to make sure that our hard work would not go unnoticed, which means things like when the Aurora blows up, you want to make sure players see it. The problem is, as soon as you make that decision, how do you make most players see the Aurora blow up? Okay, well, you have to make it so it only blows up when they're at the surface or only when they look at it. It's only after a certain amount of time. Okay, so now I can just see the Wikipedia page right now, which would say, okay, so you want to speedrun Subnautica? Okay, first of all, go down here, build this thing, swim up, look at the Aurora, and make it blow up, then go back down, go to this cave. I'm immediately I'm totally unimmersed. The beautiful facade and the deception and the intrigue are all gone because you've just laid the game bare. I fought extremely hard from the beginning. Like, we cannot make that curtain fall away. We have to make sure players never know exactly how the game works. That's the whole point of the mystery of the unknown, the thrill of the unknown. It has to be mysterious. It's a game about discovery. So if you are making a game where you're telling players what to do, you are inherently removing some of that discovery. So like in the new Zelda and Breath of the Wild, They have all these cool emergent systems with like the fire. You can like set fire to trees. You can, I can't remember, you can slide down hills on your shield. I mean, to me, that's really cool that they put that stuff in there, but I wanted to discover that. But instead, they spend all this time making that stuff, and then they put these tooltips on the loading screens, which say, oh, by the way, don't forget to use your shields to like slide down hills. Which to me is like, why did they put that in the game? What was the reasoning for putting that in? Either put it in and allow players to discover it, or don't put it in. But they did the worst of both worlds. I love Zelda, but that's just like, it's a problem. The whole fun of that game is of any game for me is discovery. The discovery of either how the world works, or like in chess, the discovery of like what the tactics and openings are. You can discover all that stuff. It just comes out of the rules of chess. Of course, you can get better at chess faster if you're going to read a book on openings, but you kind of remove all the deliciousness of that game. I would rather discover it. It all comes out. All that emergence is like the beauty of chess. To me, early on, anything that we told the player would just treat them as like a dumb person, that they're not worthy of figuring it out, and B, robbing them of any of that enjoyment. The flip side of that, of course, is that you get frustration. Players will get frustrated. They don't know where they're supposed to go. They don't know how to do something. But we saw when players did figure it out, when they did craft something really big that took them 2 hours to get all the loot for, they had total exhilaration because they did it. And it was like it was a moment for them. I started to think about frustration as actually being a good thing. Like if they're frustrated, but they keep playing, you're probably building towards something really good. If they stop playing and they don't come back, that's where you're in bad shape. Darkest Dungeon does this really well too. People will curse that game all they want, but Tyler always says, like, do they come back? And they basically always come back. You curse the game, and then 2 days later you're back in there because it's got under your skin. You can get through it. I think Subnautica does that to a much like tamer extent. I read some article by Jamie Chang of Clay and also Chris Hecker, who now wrote Spy Party. They both have pretty extensive articles on extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is where you have achievements and gamer score and gold and leveling. Intrinsic rewards are kind of everything else. It's like when you're happy to play a game or to have an aesthetic experience or to feel satisfaction at doing something just because you did it. You knew it was hard. You did it anyways. No one gave you a reward for it, but you kind of give yourself the reward. So in studies where they show people talking about these things, with games with extrinsic rewards, people are motivated. They will get into your game faster and they will stick to your game more immediately. Like they won't bounce off your game. And they will they release dopamine, like all these great things that seem like it's really great, economically for your game. If you want to get people to play your game, then extrinsic rewards are awesome. However, after the rewards stop, people stop playing those games. You train players to play for those rewards, which means you basically just have to give people a huge laundry list of stuff to do, and then they do it, and then they're done. And I guess they can feel good because they have all these Steam achievements. But to me, that feels very thin and shallow, and I feel like I probably just tricked someone into playing a game that they didn't really want to play. But we all know life is short. We have a zillion games out there. I would much rather make a game that someone feels good about playing, genuine satisfaction, genuine serenity, happiness, thrills, anything that's like the intrinsic reward, something that they know that they're doing that because they want to, not because the game is tricking them into doing it. So bringing it back to telling people what to do, you tell someone what to do, then you give feedback that they did it correctly. That's an extrinsic reward. That's training the player to do that. That is the opposite of what we want to do. We want players to figure out their own goals, but of course you can't just dump them into a world and have them be able to figure it all out. There's a lot of tricks in there to get people to do the things that are actually rewarding, but without them struggling too much, but with them realizing that they did it on their own. Or often they do it on their own. Sometimes it's a trick. Sometimes we actually want them to do something and we trick them into doing it. But over time, those are training wheels. They fall off. And eventually you get to the point where you just want to draw a map of the entire world. Or you want to speed run the game in an hour. Or you want to get down to 1,000 meters using your sea glide. Or you just want to catalog every creature in the world or kill every creature in the world. These are things that you come up with you're excited about. And to me, that is a good reason to make a game, because players are going to play it because they actually enjoy it, not because you force them or trick them. It's funny, like whenever I talk about this game, and the game did so well, and looking back on it, like, oh yeah, obviously this is why it did so well. You know, we used phobias, that we had no feedback on the stuff we didn't want players to do. It makes it look like we knew what this stuff was in the beginning, but we had no idea. It's only in retrospect that we can start to understand what was working and why. So I've spent a lot of time looking back now and trying to understand what we did. We definitely discussed not giving loot when you kill creatures. That was obvious. But I don't think we ever understood that no feedback would stop players from doing things. It's only now that I can kind of look back and see, oh, that's why that worked. But making an original game is it's filled with despair and like difficulty, and it's super vague, and you never know if you're doing the right thing. And that's just par for the course. I've learned that now. This is just normal for making any kind of new game. I mean, the thing that helps me is now that I know that it's having gone through this, I know that it's always like this. You now can just be happy to feel like it's okay if we don't know what we're making. In fact, that's, it's expected. And if we knew what we're making something derivative. So let's be happy with that and don't fret, and just keep on doing the footwork, doing experiments, taking feedback, seeing what's working, listening to the game. And then you're on track, even if it doesn't look like it. If we had made Subnautica without YouTube, but we did have some more funding up front, then we would have been fine. We still would have gotten there eventually. If we did it without that funding, we would have sunk. We got so much qualitative feedback from players, just one-on-one. We just would have done more of that. And I think we would have gotten the same reactions from players. It just would have been more labor intensive. So I don't think the quality would have changed, but the timing would have been longer. To me, it's less about the actual game you make and more about the focus. Subnautica was semi-focused. Going forward, I would like our games to be a lot more focused. Like something like Into the Breach is so insanely focused. If you see how they made that game in retrospect, they were very unfocused for a very long time, and they eventually just cut off like 75% of their work, and they focused on that core, that tight gameplay. So I would say it's less about the choices that you make and more about, I would say, the scope. So going forward, I would like to say let's be a lot more intentional and focused about what this game is about, and just weeding out everything else immediately. At the same time, you still have to allow for players and serendipity and happy accidents. You still have to allow for that. So I don't know. There's no real easy rule there. It's strange to have all these hopes and dreams with a game, and then to realize especially after tons of work, that's just not in the cards. Or you could actually stick to that and do it, but then the game is not going to be as good. So of course you want the game to be as great as possible. I mean, some of the ideas that I was really hoping for that just never worked were, first of all, we wanted it on mobile. Like, it was supposed to be like a 1.5 game, 1.5 development on iPad, and super accessible. Threw that away. Yeah, roguelike elements, replayable, the procedural creatures, the ecosystems, much more interactivity with like all the plants and animals, much more reactive. And threw all that away. You need to listen to the game. So the game is telling you what it wants. It's a paradox because you need to exert your will on the game to get it moving, to make the first version. But then once it's there, you have to kind of listen to it and see what it wants. And then you you kind of project your own ideas on it again, and then you work more on the game, and then it tells you what it wants, and then you apply your will on it again. At some point, the game is just fully telling you what it is, and you're just listening to it and making it. So it's speaking to you. Stephen King talks about this when he writes, is his characters are telling him how to finish his stories. Of course, he has an idea for a story, and he writes the characters. He's the ultimate author, he thinks. But then the characters at some point become fully formed with their own motivations, and he feels like he knows them, and they're speaking to him. So he's listening to them. Even though he's writing every word, the characters are actually guiding the story, and I don't even know who's actually writing that story anymore. A lot of creative people talk about this, where they feel like they're just channeling something they're not really making it. It's just kind of going through them, not from them. So it's slightly mystical and abstract, but I think that's quite appropriate for making games as well. You can't argue with what you're making, right? You can't argue with what players are experiencing your game. And especially if you're really worried financially, you can't just exert your will. Because if you make the game that you really want to make, and we actually did make the game we wanted to make, but I don't want it to sound like we're pandering, because we weren't. But it's an undeniable force that you can choose to ignore at your own peril. If you want to make a game that's crappier, but your ego is happy because you made the exact game that you kind of wrote in your one-page game design document, which I think is a terrible way to make original games. You can do that, but I think that the team would have rebelled and our players would have rebelled, and we would have ended up with a game that we were ultimately not very happy with. We compromised a lot among each other on the team. So that was something else I learned on this game, is that we all think about games very differently, but we each have our own priorities. So like, the artists want to create something beautiful with like giant creatures and colorful and, like really wonderful animation. And the programmers need to make that all run. And then like the business people, like most teams don't actually even have business people, but someone who's ultimately in control of the budget, they need to ship the whole thing and make sure that you don't spend so much money that you actually make a profit so you can make another game. So you have all these different ideas on the team. And I think probably most games, if they don't do very well or they don't make something wonderful, a lot of times one of those areas will be they have too much power. So you make a game that like runs really well but like looks like crap, or it runs really well and looks great but they spent way too much money and then they go out of business. For me, that conflict, our compromise, is that magic point where all those different areas are all represented and that everyone is happy enough with the solution, but it's that middle point. It's that you are conceding to an extent because you're not getting exactly what you want, but you're still ultimately, you're behind your solution. So for us, that required a lot of conflict to get to that magic point. But that middle ground is magic. That's where you make amazing games that succeed. That's my view. I don't think we ever added anything to the game that we didn't want to. So it doesn't really matter how vocal someone is. If we don't agree with them, we're just going to say that's not the game we're making. I think the only times we had to compromise our scope, where we didn't put in all the cool things that we wanted. We have tons and tons of creatures that never got made and tons of biomes, and what we ended up by shipping is a fraction of what we wanted in the game. But we also shipped lots of stuff that we never planned on in the first place. So we kind of got some extra stuff in there too. There was no moment where we realized the game was a success. It was a series of moments because we were shipping 30 big updates and we shipped hundreds or thousands of micro updates because we were shipping every day, multiple times a day. We just automatically build the game and release it. Yeah, when we released in early access, we were not successful. We had enough people playing that it covered some of our costs, but our long-term sales were not good enough to sustain the game, so we wouldn't be able to finish it. And then at some point, that changed. We released a new version, and sales picked up, and then people liked it, but they're only playing for a couple hours. Now we could get back to work, release a new version. People like that. You get a couple more hours. And at some point, it became clear that the game was working and it was successful financially. The money is coming in at a much higher rate than you're spending. Awesome. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have years. I think that the stuff that we ultimately didn't put in the game was stuff that didn't deserve to go in the game, not as much as the stuff that we actually put in. We're definitely not perfect there. We have plenty of things in the game that I grimace at that I just really don't think should be in there. But who am I to say? I didn't want big creatures either, so I didn't want the scary stuff, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. And the big lesson is, even though I'm game director, I actually didn't design all this game, not even close. I just gave a talk on a lot of this stuff, for the Game Developers Conference about the design of Subnautica, and I had to go read about how we did things. I had to interview lots of people on the team to find out how we actually did things, because there's so many decisions. Even the story structure alone, there's no way I could fully understand that without taking a step back and kind of analyzing it. I guess that's where I like the pillar idea, because the whole team can kind of go in that one direction. You don't have to go through someone else to get something approved. they can just naturally be doing things that are kind of going all in the same direction. Like the more I work on games, the more I realize it's not an auteur relationship. There's not one person behind it. Of course, if you have a small indie game, if you're Lucas Pope, then yeah, maybe it is. And maybe it's really fun to work on games like that. But at this scale, it's really hard to just kind of have one person at the helm. Maybe you can do it for a short period of time, but I don't think it would be a great way to motivate a team long term if everyone is just making somebody else's game. I don't know, at least the way we work, I mean, I wouldn't be very good at directing all the animation, all the VFX, all the sound effects, all the level design, all the story. I mean, many of us are involved in many of those areas, even though it's not our discipline. Ultimately, there are so many people that are so much better at various disciplines than any one person, certainly me. And I think that you can make a much better game when people are empowered to, contribute in their own way. So that's not how we work. I don't think I'd ever want to work that way. So it doesn't mean that I won't be kicking and screaming on many issues that I'm, that I really want my way. I don't get my way most of the time, so just sometimes. We want to make games that are more inclusive. So we want our games to be able to be played on more systems by more diverse, not really diverse, a different audience, but a more inclusive audience, like not just genre games, but again, the more emotional games, ones that can reach more people. I'm interested in commercial games, which sounds kind of crass, but I want to make games that reach many, many people. And to do that, you need to make games commercial. That doesn't mean it has to be lowest common denominator. It just means that, you need to make games that appeal to a wide cross-section of people. You don't want to put things in that are just going to alienate people. But at the same time, you still want to make something that affects people. I think that's a big focus for us, is how can we reach a lot more people in a much bigger way and do it without taking 5 years for every game. I don't know, I have 4 or 5 more of those games left before I'm done, probably. So I don't really want to work on just 4 or 5 more games. So we have to figure out a way to make them shorter and get to the heart of the game faster and easier, and also without burning people out, because it's a huge amount of effort over a long period of time with a lot of uncertainty. So that can wear on people. I don't know how you make games that reach more people that still, truly touch them or truly move them in some way. It's probably not that different than our current process. It's just watching people play and understanding why you're making the game and staying focused on the emotions. I think that's a big part of it. But if I had that answer, I would be doing much better. So I don't know. We're working on Below Zero now, which is a mini sequel, I guess is probably the best way we could explain it. It is a standalone new game in the Subnautica universe. It is perhaps 1/3 the same as Subnautica, but 1/3 new, 1/3 improved. It is half the size approximately of Subnautica, and I'm not actually very involved with it, so we have somebody else at the helm. So that's a huge experiment for us. I'm starting to work on a new game. We have that team working on Subnautica. We're at the point where we want to allow our team to grow, people on the team to get new responsibilities and have more than one game in production at a time, which is a huge risk. So many game studios have gone out of business when they go from one team to 2. We're definitely feeling those pains, but we have to try it. We can't have our team roles be static. We need people to be able to change and evolve and grow. If we can go from 1 team to 2, then we can go 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, and we can scale. Not that we need to just grow unceasingly, because that's not our goal. But at some point, I'm not going to be around anymore. We can't just be making games from Charlie's little prototypes. We need to be making games from other people's prototypes too. So yeah, that's a big challenge for us. I've learned to trust my excitement. If I get excited about a game, I've never had that experience where I worked on a game that just wasn't profitable. I'm here because I'm excited about making games. If I'm making games that seem like they're going to be profitable, but I'm not excited about, I've failed. Just why would I spend my life doing that? It sounds horrible. I'd rather make something that I know that I love, and if it doesn't succeed, well, at least I spent a few years on fire and excited and doing what I know that I should be doing. I don't worry at all when we release games. It doesn't matter how they do. It does matter, but I've already won. If I'm excited about it, I just got to do that. I always believed in the game. It wasn't easy when it wasn't selling. and the game wasn't coalescing, but I knew there was something wrong too. You could just look at the game and like, this isn't quite hitting the mark. Like this is not fulfilling itself. But I think most game companies, they fly pretty close to the sun too. Like we spent all of our money from NS2 to make Subnautica and to put it in that first, early access. And then we spent everything. So if that didn't succeed, we'd be done after 8+ years in business. Now we need to start thinking about, okay, how can we allow at least 1 or 2 failures without going out of business? It's a totally different mindset, because you need to be able to fail if you're going to try something pretty creative, right? You have an idea about what you want to make, and you're flexible on the product. Like you're flexible on the actual features. So it's like you have like a feeling or an idea, and you're wayfinding. So you see something on the horizon and you're going there. You don't know how you're going to get there. You just know you're going there. I guess you do have to have faith that the market will support you. But I think most games are not like, they don't figure out the size of their target audience and fill a niche. They're like, well, we've calculated that there are approximately 1 million 13-year-olds who love cross-stitch, and therefore we will target them and we will get this many of them to convert, and that will pay for this budget. To me, that would be a completely soulless and terrible way to make a game. So we don't think of it that way. We just think that if you make a game that fulfills, it does something interesting and does it well in a moderately accessible way, then it's going to succeed. I would probably tell the super rookie version of myself, it's going to be really difficult and it's going to be really fun, and all the uncertainty is normal. Uncertainty is part of it. If you don't have that uncertainty, you're probably not making something very interesting. So embrace it and take lots of ideas from everywhere. Like it's not your vision. You're going to set the direction, but it's not your game. You need to take input from everyone, and that's where it really takes off, is when everyone is focused in the same direction. Don't be like an authoritarian dictator, which I was in the past. Done with that. So done with it, right? Yeah, everyone can vouch for that now. So done with that. There's no way I would ever tell you if there's something you missed in this game. That would just be antithetical to the entire reasoning for making this game. And the whole point of the game is to make sure that you're always questioning whether there's something you missed. So here we are with the very first prototype of the game, back when it was called Descend. That was just a code name, of course, but you can already see that we were kind of aiming towards this. We knew it was going to be about exploration. We knew we were going to be journeying deep down into the dark. So that's where that code name came from. Let's see, there's not much here. Return to the surface. I kind of like that. It's kind of evocative. It's like you're going into the game and, something scary and enchanting is going to happen. Okay, so here we are on my really beautiful submarine. So the cool thing about prototyping is you can do it really quickly because it looks like crap. So, we just kind of threw in, we had like no artists working on this, obviously. And this is all just like programmers putting stuff together, grabbing artwork from the internet and kind of random other stuff. Like from our previous game, you'll see some Natural Selection 2 artwork down there. So here's my sub. We have just a height map here with a bunch of random junk down here. This is loot that you can pick up. And back at this stage, we were thinking, well, this is going to be about building your submarine. So this is actually modular submarine. We were thinking it was going to be more cooperative, which is why we have all these different ways that you can kind of control your sub with these different handles. So we thought like one person might be here, who would adjust this throttle. You can see that those little bubbles there are showing you how fast we're going. So because I turned that throttle on here and nothing on the other side, I'm just like spinning in place. And because I dropped this ballast, I'm going down, down, down. You can see already that's kind of frightening. And you can also see that we made the bottom of this sub glass because we just needed a quick fix. Like, if you're gonna pilot your sub, how you're gonna know where to go? Okay, we'll just make the bottom glass. We weren't thinking about art at that point. Let's see here. I'm gonna see if I can manage to navigate this reasonably well. Let's see. Oh my gosh. I play this prototype relatively regularly, so I kind of know all about it. I just like to go back and just check it out and kind of see how far we've come. And I don't know. It's fun to see like what we achieved even in this crappy prototype. Like, I don't know. I kind of like the feelings that it's generating. I like looking down and kind of seeing all this almost like space junk. It almost doesn't feel like underwater. I don't know, it's calming. Although the piloting of the sub is really difficult. And you can probably see right away one of the things that we didn't like is this running back and forth constantly and moving the levers. You can definitely see some of the problems already, but I'm gonna go over this way. I've got both my thrusters going left. Now I'm gonna go over here and I'm actually gonna get some loot, which is kind of the core aspect of the core thing we are testing in this game. So here we go, I'm spinning my sub. Okay, I'm going a little too high. I'm gonna come down a little bit. It's extremely picky and fidgety. Here we go. This is the place I wanna go, out there. I see like an air tank, a scuba tank, some natural selection 2 crappy assets without the textures, and a bunch of stuff from probably the Unity asset store. Okay, now I'm out swimming. Okay, I left through my dive hatch. You can see in the upper left, I have 1 minute of oxygen. It shows my depth. All that is actually in the game today. That all remained. And again, I think it's neat that we have this kind of space feel happening. Space and underwater are both like surprisingly similar in many ways. So I picked up my scuba tank. Like we didn't have crafting at this stage, but we did have stuff that you could pick up. You can hear my oxygen is starting to get a little faster. Okay, there's my scrap metal. That's still in the game. Oh, there's my O2. It really kicked in. Okay, I may not actually make it. I may die. So in this game, this prototype, we actually had no load save or world reset. So when you die, it goes back to the main menu and that's it. It's like permadeath, basically, which was purely a technical consideration. Okay, I'll just make it back. 6 seconds left. Back. Okay. It's surprising how stressful this game is already. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it kind of gives you an idea of just how powerful the setting is for this game. Just we get so much for free just by being underwater. You actually could build here. So you can see I use this icon here and I can choose what kind of stuff I want to build. So here's another ballast. Oh, there's gonna be a nice bug. Okay, so it just added a ballast component onto here, which, the more pieces you're building, it changes the physics. Here's a normal room. Oh, I need more scrap metal. So it's using 1 scrap metal for each room, I think right now. So I can actually build a small submarine from here and then use that to swim farther. So that was kind of the core prototype here. So this is the 4th prototype, and you can see we haven't changed much, but we do have a name. You can see, I think we actually have the random generation of the world now. Okay, where else? Our sub has gotten a lot of upgrades. We broke the ballast into, front and a rear. What else do we have? We have a map, which we actually removed for many reasons. We have creatures, really terrible looking creatures, but fish and stuff swimming around. It's definitely bringing this world to life. We've got some plants. We are definitely still experimenting with different building methods for the sub. So this was like a compartmental model. It's kind of hard to explain, but we got rid of the cube approach, and now we have this hull that when you start building inside the walls here, it kind of carves itself out. And whatever you build kind of finds its way inside. I'll show you that in a minute. So this one should be a little easier to navigate because players were complaining that it was too hard to navigate. So instead of all the different rooms for the thrusters, I can now adjust them all from one spot. So this is, we're already, we're leaving the whole co-op mode now. This is like clearly designed for one person to navigate, which I think was a good step in a good direction. Little did we know, we would never do co-op in this game. So these prototypes are for the team. I mean, yeah, they're for us. We need to know what we want to build. It's really easy for the team to get, kind of, I don't know, not sad, but despondent if they don't know what they're building. We need to be building these prototypes to start fleshing out, how is the world structured? How many creatures do we need? Are they creatures of this world or of different worlds? What sizes should they be? How much loot do we need? Like how many loot types and what's the distribution? These prototypes are going to answer many of those questions. There's so many questions during development that hold up so much of the game. We really need to start answering those questions right away. So that's what these prototypes are for. So here, I like the idea of picking up sand, but how do we represent sand that you can pick up? Well, here's just a texture, a box with a texture on it. Here's the beginning of blueprints. So blueprints, I forgot how they function in this version, but probably quite different than in the final version. Oh, you can see this little sonar ping from time to time. That we saw that players were losing their sub, so we put that little ping on there so you could always find your sub again. So, you know, little by little, we're kind of understanding, like learning basically, and making small improvements or big improvements. So let me just grab some stuff here. This kind of part, this loop right here, this picking up loot and, you know, swimming around the sub and making your way back to it before you run out of oxygen, that's all pretty much the loop in the game. So we already had that at this level. So let's see, I'll grab some more stuff and I'm gonna swim back to my sub and build something. Let's see, I mean, I think this is where we started thinking about the crafting menu, and this is from Don't Starve. So this kind of idea that, you know, all your recipes show up here and you can see the ingredients, and there's like hidden elements that aren't here yet that, you know, pop up later. So here we have intermediate ingredients. So like here I can turn sand into glass. Okay, there we go, more glass. Red means I can't craft it anymore. So we're starting to get some usability on the crafting menu. We have a knife now, we have fins, which we called flippers because we didn't know what we were talking about. So now you can see in the bottom of my HUD, we have kind of like a Minecraft style crafting and you know, interface. So we ended up by ditching that later, but you can see we're just trying all sorts of things. But you can definitely see that the crafting is developing here, and the sub, like the driving part, the manipulation of the sub, that's all starting to fade away. And you can also see that the world is starting to develop a bit. You can see it like fades off into darkness. We have like the world structure here is definitely flatter. We knew this was going to be our safe shallows area, so we wanted this to start off in a safer area. If I keep playing this demo, you'll see that the edges start to get deeper, which is a structure that we ended up by keeping. Let's see, you can see my fins are active in the lower left because you can see them pulsing. That was a way to kind of, you know, we're trying to figure out how we can allow items to, you know, change attributes in the game, but also make sure that you know about it. We have the beginnings of the actual loot that we put in the game. Many of these ended up by being real loot types that we finished, you know, that 1.0 has. We have cuttable kelp. These things are, you know, pretty ugly, but this was something that we ended up by finally shipping, is these kelp forests. Our art director, Corey, really loved the idea of having these big swaying kelp trees or vines, just like Monterey Bay, which is near our office, or relatively near. So this was a quick way to kind of get them in the game, even at an ugly stage, just so we could start planning to have a kelp area. And then let's see if I can actually build something, if I can remember how to do that. I can build, oh, we have furniture, which is like stuff in the sub. Okay, here we go. I can build, let's see, like a door. Okay, so now once I craft the door, I end up in door mode. You can see I can just build it right here. And let's see, try something else here. This is where we're really starting to figure out other ways that we can have the player still retain that sub building stuff. That's like really buggy, but you get an idea. I can now open and close this hatch, which doesn't really work. But I'm not going to apologize for it because it's a crappy playable. Okay, scrambler. Okay, so now you can see, okay, here we required a blueprint to build some of these higher tech items. And once you have that blueprint, yeah, you can craft this stuff. So we're starting to see progression here. Okay, this is actually the 8th prototype. So let's see. I think here is where we actually started experimenting with a new biome. And we were starting to think about actually creating art for this game, because up to this point, you can see it's all placeholder and stuff copied from our previous games. We had some concept art from Corey that showed like this kind of dangerous lava, you know, lava zone. And so we wanted to start making, you know, start prototyping what this might look like. I'm actually inside an exosuit now. So that's what my HUD is showing me. I think that's what that is, my exosuit. Yeah, okay. Here we're playing with different movement modes. So you can see these geysers. I don't know if you can tell, but they're actually pushing me up. So let's see, we have these glowing lava balls, which we actually ended up shipping almost this exact thing. It's like a really cool shader that our VFX guy, Sylvain, created. I actually think that those are final. I mean, they're yeah, they improved their quality, but that basic idea made it into the final game. What else? What can I show you here? So we have like some active growing areas. We have all these particles everywhere. It's definitely a much more dynamic part of the world. You can see we have the beginning of lighting. So we can see, I don't know what you call that, but the lighting on the bottom of the ocean. This is the beginning of the sea moth. Again, placeholder art. But you can start to see we're actually starting to care a little bit more about visuals here. This thing, I think I got stuck in this. This is like the beginning of some Spelunky style, oh, it doesn't work here. Some Spelunky style goo balls that I was hoping would, you know, the ill-fated ecosystem and kind of emergent behavior, all that stuff that we ended up by scrapping. Okay, so here we actually have our first game modes, which is interesting that we had actually been thinking about these from such a long time ago. It actually turns out we don't have creative here, but we decided early on that we wanted people to play the game their own way because it really wasn't about challenge. So that's why we have, you know, the permadeath mode. Later we added creative. You can turn off survival. Just didn't seem important to us to kind of force people to play one certain way. This is one of the first first concept pieces that we had. You can see the kelp forest idea that we started to put in there. This one actually wasn't procedurally generated, but it was voxel terrain. So we used this plugin called Voxelland. Oh, we even have a little splash screen for drama. That's cool. That actually is pretty much in the final version. Oh, okay, that's right. We started to give the context. That was a splash. It was supposed to be a crash land, but you get the basic idea. Terrible font. I don't know where that came from. It's probably me. Okay, here we are. So this is the beginning of kind of, I wouldn't say a story mode, but it's definitely starting to get context. So ignore the artwork. There's stand-ins for what would be, this would be like the escape pod. I don't know if we had the idea of an escape pod yet, but we obviously didn't want to have a marine here. This is from our previous game, Natural Selection. Hey, look, I have a view model now. Arms. There's like some random marine here which is just showing me scale. A lot of times when you see games like this with random models like this, it's for scale. And I'm moving super slowly. Ugh. Okay. There we are, first oxygen indicator, probably because we saw enough people playtesting and dying by mistake. I think it should refill when I get to the surface, if I can ever get to the surface. There we go. Okay, so that, you can recognize that audio. It's pretty close to what we ended up by shipping with. Now we're starting to develop the environment art, because this whole time, like the first couple months, you know, we don't have artists working. But shortly after that, you do need to start getting the rest of the team moving. So this is, you know, no doubt one of their experiments. They're trying to like figure out, you know, how much detail we need, what types of plants. Gosh, this is slow. I need to like get back to my base and get me some fins. This is ridiculous. What were we thinking? I can't pilot this anymore. Okay, so we were already starting to abandon the whole piloting your sub, at least early on. So here's our fabricator. So you've seen this before. This is our crafting menu. Okay, now, oh, here we go. That's what I needed. I forgot about this. Okay, this is the beginning of our goals. You can see in the upper right, find computer, complete, get dive suit, complete. Now it's telling me get metal. This was, I can't remember if this was more of a tutorial or more of an experiment for quests, but now that I have my dive suit, you can see I have my scuba mask on. This had a nice extra effect of obfuscating the edge of the edge of my screen a bit, which created a little bit more claustrophobia and tension. We have a day-night cycle now. So usually these prototypes are, I mean, they're usually inspirational for the team. This one, I think, is cool visually. It's obviously a huge step up from the earlier prototypes. Gameplay-wise, I think we probably weren't really focused on that here, but you can actually start this, I mean, you can start to get a feel for the scope of the world. I mean, just like these huge fall-offs, we're really starting to understand that you're going to start at, you know, where the terrain is the most shallow, and then it kind of falls off as you expand out. So that was, you know, kind of a proof of concept, I would say, even though it's actually not working super well. I think, is that a creep vine or something in the distance? Okay. No, this is us trying to see how much mileage we could get from using voxels to sculpt, you know, geometry like this. Because early on, you also need to figure out, like what your level design pipeline is going to be like. Are we going to write our own sculpting tools? Yes, that's what we ended up by doing. So you can sculpt the environment. But we also could have done this all through models. We could have just made a whole bunch of models and stacked them together. So this was an experiment. I don't know what this was showing us because it looks pretty ugly. But you can also see we're changing the palette as we go deeper. So that was the first time that we were kind of creating that little scarier feel as you get deeper. You can hear we have the beginning of our real soundtrack in here. Let's see. Guess we'll do Freedom for now. Good, we updated that font. That's good, that thing was ugly. So you can just see this is all, very slow improvement on many areas. It's very evolutionary. There was no moment where all of a sudden like the game was great. This is all just piece by piece. Okay, here we have the intro. So now we have the story set up. You crash landed on the planet. You're a habitation vessel. You're the only survivor. Here we go. Okay, so now this is actually starting to look like what we actually shipped on later. So yeah, this is our early access build. We have this sparking radio, which we later, we didn't actually know what we were going to do with this, but later we turned that into a story device. Our fabricator is arted up on the wall. It operates a little differently than before, but it's basically the same UI, a little clunkier. Obviously frame rate was not something we were caring about too much yet. Okay, so now you can see, now we've just evolved that terrain. It's the same stuff that we had before. It's just more art, pretty much. You can see we're trying to get big flocks of fish. It's funny, we actually don't have that many fish in the final game, or if we do, they're particle systems and not models. So you can see it looks cool, but oh my God, the frame rate is terrible. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're not going for frame rate. Although this does say December 14, so we were selling this. We're gonna have to check on this. It's hard for me to imagine that we actually sold this. I think this is probably about a month before we started selling it. I told you before, you gotta be embarrassed on your first release, and I am highly embarrassed. Ugh, it's like almost unplayable. Okay, but the game is starting to look like the game. Oops, I'm a nub. I just completely died. And this one might show the aurora. There it is. Now this one actually, I believe, is a model. I mean, it's still terrible looking, but yeah, it's not the fleshed out aurora that we'd add later. But you can definitely see kind of the direction we're headed now. We're starting to get a little more confident with, our core loop. We've arted up a lot here. Voxel terrain in full effect. We nailed the scale here. Definitely the world structure is coming together. This is our friendly area. You can see we've worked a lot on the lighting to kind of keep your first experience to be happy and bubbly. Oh, and then we removed, remember I talked about before how the sand was that box? It was really not great. Actually, can I turn on oxygen? Haha. Okay. There we go. No, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? This should have worked.
Cheaters never win.
No, they always win. Cheaters are game developers. We're always cheating. So that sand, we just ended up by adding terraforming to the world, which was a really cool idea. You can see I'm actually deforming the terrain. But this is, this was something we were thinking, okay, well, we have voxel terrain. Let's do it. Oh, look at this sweet PDA. But it turned out to be a huge performance loss. I mean, just so much work to try to make that happen and be performant. So we ended up by ditching it completely. So we have voxel terrain, but it's just not deformable. So we still have some placeholders here. Start to have some real creatures. These creatures, most of these made it into the final game. I guess all these bladderfish and gasopods. This is like, definitely shaping up. This is the second biome. We didn't have any other biomes in the other version, at least not all integrated together. So this is grassy plateaus here. You can see why it's called that, the red grass and these plateaus. And yeah, the game is starting to come together here, even though it's really, really painful to play.